Hello, my name is Casey, and my presentation is on radiation exposure. So, why does radiation exposure exist in society? Radioactivity is part of our Earth. It exists in soil, water, vegetation, and so on. Man has always been exposed to radiation. People receive exposure from man made radiation, which can be tobacco, televisions, medical x rays, smoke detectors, lantern mantles, nuclear medicine, building materials, and so far. But by far, the most significant source of man made radiation exposure to the public is from medical procedures, um, which can be medical x rays, nuclear medicine, and also radioactive therapy. So, how does radiation exposure happen? So people are exposed to radiation by television, water from rivers or lakes that pick up radiation from rocks and soils, consumer products, which can be cell phones, watches, clocks, computers, natural gas, soil, radon, cigarette smoking, plane travel, which mostly affects pilots, flight attendants, and frequent flyers more than most people, and medical imaging, which is the most common cause of exposure. Most of these sources use low enough levels that they do not damage tissue. So, where does radiation exposure happen? People can typically be exposed to radiation anywhere. Radiation is commonly found in places such as airplanes, security places such as airports, nuclear power plants, hospitals or clinics, military facilities, and aerospace facilities. Most of these places are occupational places, so workers have a greater risk of being exposed. Risks of the community in the future. So, there are two broad categories of health effects, which is chronic, which means long term, and acute, which is short term. So, chronic exposure is continuous or intermittent exposure to radiation over a long period of time. And these risks include cancer, benign tumors, cataracts, and harmful genetic changes. Acute health effects occur when large parts of the body are exposed to a large amount of radiation. The large exposure can occur all at once or from multiple exposures in a short period of time. And these effects include death, radiation sickness, and burns. So, the etiological factors of radiation exposure: exposure during medical exams, such as x rays or computed tomography scans. Medical exams, the amount of radiation used are so small or carefully controlled that the risk of problems associated with exposure is tiny. Um, Use of nuclear imaging techniques, UV radiation, which is typically from the sun, consumer products, like I said before, computers, cell phones, watches, and so on. And also atomic bombings, like the ones in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki produced large amounts of radiation, which did significant damage and made the cities inhabitable for many years. So how to solve the problem? Strategy 1. Congress Congress and the President assign radiation protection responsibilities to EPA through laws. Regulations or requirements that can apply to individuals, businesses, states, local governments, or other institutions. Many environmental regulations set standards that limit the amount of hazardous material allowed in the environment. So, strategy 2. In a radiation emergency, people are advised to take certain steps. And these steps usually include going inside, closing all your doors and windows, bringing your pets in if you can, and bringing anything that they would need for the next 24 hours, removing your outer layer of clothing, and taking a shower if you can. But if you can't, wash your face, hands, and parts of your body that were uncovered at a sink or a faucet. And then put on some clean clothes, and then stay tuned for further information or instructions. So, some cultural and historical examples. In Japan, they test their food and water for radioactivity, and they've also restricted the shipment of food products produced in Fukushima and Ibaraki because of radioactive contaminants. In Australia, they practice holistic safety, which focuses on technological, human, and organizational aspects, which pretty much they make sure technology and such are safe for people to use. What does research literature say we should do? Um, According to doctors Arshana and Jigar Salvi, in the various aspects of radiation safety, people should keep the time of exposure to a minimum, maintain distance from source. Where it's appropriate, place a shielding between yourself and the source, and protect yourself against radioactive contamination. In my opinion, people need to be more educated about the risks of radiation and what it could do to you. They should also know how to protect themselves in the case of a radiation emergency. So they should know what steps to take. And yeah, and people should try to stay away from the radiation exposure as much as possible. And these are the references I used for my presentation.